So, show you gonna have something to show me this afternoon? Did you wanna? You have something with you? All right. All right. This guy stays busy, doesn't he? I don't know how you keep up with it.
I didn't call her about it, but the inside got lovely.
Oh, we don't want you to go.
Gases were still in that place.
Straight up noon.
One out.
Hello, everybody. Hi. We have an amazing team with us today. Mother getting her coffee. Kathy Rausch and his son preparing the wonderful program for mother-daughter team.
There's my husband and his father.
Oh, wonderful. How wonderful.
All right, so you're on.
Oh, that's so great. Well, do come in, and while we're getting organized here, anybody have a story?
Yes.
Yes, Barb.
A painting was taken out of my slot. Somebody took it, they cut a corner off of it, pasted some little feathers on the corner, and put the corner back in my slot. And then today, when I went to get
Everybody hear this? Now, no, we do have ghosts in this house, so you know that. Really? Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've had people actually come in and they have this paranormal group found ghosts here. And they have them recorded, and I had a conversation with Coffee, and we saw the paranormal activity. So, Barb, continue.
Feathers on the painting.
a couple little feathers. The part they cut off was just the size. The painting was on the back of a poster, so it was pretty large. The part they cut off was this size, and the paint and the feathers, a couple little feathers were taped on it with green tape.
Wow.
Be put back in my slot so I would know for sure that somebody took the rest of the painting, and then today, even that part was gone. I shouldn't have put it back in my slot.
Okay.
So
Detective
it's so
Izzo,
strange.
along with the...
So they only left the corner
They left
with
the
the
corner,
feathers
so
taped
I would
on?
know that they had taken the painting out.
Did they cut it?
They cut it, it wasn't torn, it was
Canvas
done on
board.
purpose. And
Do you have any enemies here at the cultural
I
Arts?
lost. I figured somebody that wants to get even with me for something, I don't know.
Because you're too good.
That's, yeah.
People are strange.
Well, and welcome to the Cultural Arts
I think
Center.
Sorry to destroy your
Oh, no, no,
image.
I think that's important for the word to get out.
My husband said it's a best, so
Yeah, so we will talk to Todd and Jeff about
I told Todd, but all he did was laugh.
that. Because he was thinking,
What do I do about this?
So-
it needs
Too much
time.
paperwork.
We will give it time.
And it was so bizarre.
Well,
How do you put a notice out for?
I would go right to all the instructors studios and they would
Yeah.
go if they're, because I'll hear a story and it'll sound totally strange, like not even similar to that, but kind of strange in that way. And then a couple weeks later, I've heard another story, and then they start to connect together. And sometimes it's people doing weird things for their own weird reasons, attention or something.
Well,
But
that's-
yeah, I would definitely let the instructors know. You know, at least help to be like, get it off your chest.
Wow.
All right, are we ready?
Mother,
Okay.
what a
I'm gonna
great
turn off the
team.
lights for you.
And Eric says, this is where I got it, he says. So, does that humble you, Mom?
It took me a moment. He said, Mom, your mandalas are going to be perfect up there. And then he's like, and what if I put my ceramics with the U and say, and we can call it, that's where I get it. And I was like, like me? Like I So yeah.
And you told me that when I said the title, because at first I thought the show is for both of us and the title describes me, but then when I told it to her and she was like, took her a second and she goes, well, that does make a lot of sense because when I read your artist statement when you graduated from college, I was inspired by what you had written and I started to see
Inspired, I cried. I'm like, I didn't know you saw the word.
I imagine now having 2 kids, it all makes way more sense.
Yes.
Before I was just like, whatever, Mom.
Yeah, like stop. I mean, it inspired me to stop a lot more and look at dirt, flowers, weeds. Yes.
Stop and smell the dirt. You do that all the time.
And so, Eric, what did you think when your mother moved to the Mandala?
Mandala.
Roll drive.
No.
Yes.
Romance.
What?
Not at your artwork. No,
You want to use the microphone?
Sure,
You know
yeah.
what? Could you stand on that side instead of?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
This is, to answer your question, what did I think when she started painting the mandalas? I didn't think much of it because she's always been kind of painting and working as an artist at home. It's just always been part of our life. So it made perfect sense that she would have an easel set up and would be painting. But then I read her book, which was interesting to read. It's not a tell-all, but there's a lot of your life in that book and the story of how these paintings have helped her get over the things that she's needed to get over. And I read it. It was really interesting because I read it knowing that my mom had written it, but I was reading it as if I didn't know her. And I was able to kind of look at it both ways and see, one, like, oh, I'm proud of her. I'm proud that she got to this place, that it's written down, that she's going through this journey, that she's gone as far as she has. And then I thought of, if I didn't know her and I didn't have those feelings of, oh, she's my mom and I'm proud, I would be able to connect to this because it's a very human story, and that's what I'm realizing, and that's what I'm relying on for any sort of optimism with the way the world is today. It seems like we all have our issues. We all have our reasons for being late to that meeting, or I don't work out enough for this reason, or my relationship is going this way, and some things, catastrophic diseases, and life just hits you over and over and over again. And I think we get caught up in our stories a little more than everybody's story, how we're all connected through all of that, and our anger and frustration with our personal things lead us to have more issues with the people that we're not getting the chance to understand. And so when I read my mom's book, I thought about how I have things that I've worked through and people I know that have worked through things. And so looking at it, it's not about what she went through, but it's about what she went through to get over her stuff, and maybe that's a chance to help someone else get over their stuff, or lack of a better way to say it. So I like the mandalas. To sum up.
If I can
brought
bring
up-
one in. Can I bring one in?
Sure.
Yes.
He brought up a really good point about the book. I was going to tell this in my thing, but I was basically like in the middle of the night told, write this book. Here are the 8 chapters. And when I told someone, a group a few days later, a woman says, great, you can be my keynote speaker next year and I'll buy 100 books. So this was like 2 days after, so I had a commitment. And so the book happened, and as I was getting into why the mandala, well, let me go forward. Here's Eric as a young child.
Do you want to get into,
Yeah.
I'm going to dim the lights so that,
Okay.
would you mind just,
There. So what is a mandala? This is the first one I painted. And when I painted this, I was in what can be called dark night of the soul. I was going through a lot of stuff. And when I saw I went to the Jung house, a friend said, I'm in a show at the Jung house. My painting's in an art show. And she's like, I've never painted or drawn anything before. And I was like, I had been to art school. I thought, how is this possible? So I said, okay, I'll go. And there were about 15, 20 mandalas, 20 by 20 inch, 24 by 24 inch. Not this one. I had never heard of a mandala. I was raised Catholic. So anyway, so I never heard anything. But they all were framed and were beautiful, and they had the artist statement and what this piece of art meant to them. And I said, whatever this is, I'm in. And then I was like, ooh, mandala's evil? Because I was raised Catholic. And no offense to Catholic, I have a great respect for Catholicism. I just never looked outside of it. So I painted this, I call it My Big Family. I was going through a lot of stuff with my family of origin. And back to the book, as I started writing the book, I tell this story, and I thought, I'm not going to dive into all the stuff, because there are lots of books about all the stuff we go through. The point of the book is, I had a positive trigger. You know, we hear triggers, you're going to get triggered by this person and this person. Well, this was a positive trigger, and when I saw it, I thought, I love this, I love being creative. So that's how this started. Should I just keep going?
yeah.
Okay. So I just kept painting mandalas. My incredibly supportive husband said, what is this, like the mandala of the month club? They were like 4-day workshops. These are, pretty large paintings. So this one I dedicated to my mom, who I hadn't spoken to at that point in 10 years. And this was my mom and me. There were 8 kids in my family, huge family. And occasionally she would ask me to go with her to pick her favorite things out in the fields. This is bittersweet, and, so this is like farmy, flowery. So I dedicated it to my mom. Every time I walk by these paintings, it has they're positive. It's like the negative stuff kind of works itself out into your psyche, and then for me, and it turns into this beautiful, for me, a beautiful painting. My older son had told me around this time, Mom, paint your rage, paint your rage. So you'll see it in the hallway out there, all of this sparkly stuff. That's what comes out of it.
He's a Gen Xer, so
He is. But he likes the snake one. So, and then I just continue to paint him. This I call a self-portrait coming out. It's like, it's pretty self-explanatory. They're butterflies, as they're young and coming out and then going into the dragonfly. So a mandala, Carl Jung, used mandalas. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of that. And according to him, as you create mandalas, or really, mostly when you create your own, but also looking at and contemplating, your mind works out things, your psyche works out things that you're not even aware of, and you don't even, it's like it realigns things. And after doing dozens of paintings, and can I go here? Is it? No, okay. That one is called My Maui. I spent a week in Maui with my mandala mentor. Thank you, honey, for supporting me in that journey. And this is oh good, thank you. And this is, I just love this one, so I threw it in there. That was a really incredible experience. So, so then, these are drawings. After I painted a whole bunch of them, I started to doodle. Well, the first one on the left is I took a class, the butterfly one. His name is Paul Hussiston, mandalas.com. He travels with Deepak Chopra. He's the one who taught my mentor, Mary, and he came to town. So that was the first drawing I did. The second one is another drawing I did while I was asked to do mandala work at a conference up in Toronto. So I started drawing them, and I started drawing a lot of them. Like, these are doodles. So this is the kind of thing that I'll doodle when I'm thinking of something, or in a class, or just, you know, have a notebook, and I've doodled hundreds of them. The middle one is one Ruby, Eric's daughter. Ruby knows how to draw a mandala. She was like 3, and I was telling her how I teach people mandalas, and we were painting, and she was doodling. She's like, well, how do you do it, Mimi? And I said, well, I said, well, let me show you. You do a dot, and she's like, look, give me that compass. And she's like, I don't have the painting here, but the middle one is an example of how we just start, and then she, you know, circle, 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 stuff in it, throw some glitter on it, and some jewels, and you're good to go. So then I started teaching the class. The idea came to me, teach people to doodle mandalas, because it's a doodle, so who cares? Who cares if it's something they've never heard of? Who cares if they've never drawn before? If you teach them to doodle, that takes away all the pressure of it being anything magical. So I have taught 500-ish people since 2013 how to draw a mandala. And again, the process came to me. Teach them to doodle, here are the steps. And I never deterred from the steps. I get them started with a compass and a ruler, so then their analytical brain is like, ooh, this is good, this all makes perfect sense. And then I have a little stencil, and they draw little lotus petals around 2 of the circles, and then, they're all totally in control. And then they look down and they go, wow, look what I did. And so then I just teach them to just draw whatever symbols come. And oh my gosh, I've taught, it's just so fun. It's one of the most enjoyable things I've ever done. Exact same instructions, exact same process, either on black paper or white paper. And they all turn out so incredibly different. This is what, at the end of a 4-hour class, this is the kind of thing that people, and they're so proud, and that's what I what my message is. Creativity, you activate that divine creativity that we were born with, and you just activate it, and you give yourself a little bit of time and put it on paper, and it changed my life, so I'm just assuming it will change other people's lives. It's just so much fun. And this is how the book was born. I was reading a book, and I sometimes draw in books. I was raised never to write in a book, but I do. And I was reading a book called Divine Compensation by Marianne Williamson, and I was already doodling, and I fell asleep on the left. That's what I had already doodled. I fell asleep, and I woke up, and those were the notes that I was told, here, write this book, here's how you start, and these are going to be the names of the chapters. That's how the book was born. And that's the book, Activate Divine Creativity, the Life-Changing Magic of the Mandala. So, in what you see out in the hallway, the main hallway, there's 8 of them in a row. For the book, after I wrote it, I thought, well, gosh, I should draw a mandala. So I drew a mandala for each chapter that represents what the chapter is about. So that's what's on the left of the drawing. And then 2 years later, when I was asked to go up to Toronto to do this conference, we had a conversation about paintings, and the idea came up, why don't you do a painting for each chapter? So I took the drawing, had it blown up, and created a painting. So these are the 8 chapters in the book, the mandalas for the 8 chapters in the book that you see in the hallway. It's kind of through the process of creation. The seed is planted, creation, and so it grows. You know, 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, and this is kind of gooey, watery, kind of like how creation started. And then it takes all kinds. The universal need to express. Every individual, no matter who, where, what your circumstances are, at some point we have to express ourselves. And then the self-actualization, the individual need to evolve. So I personally believe, for myself, and a lot of people I know, that's became a really important thing to evolve as a human being, emotionally, and spiritually. And so that's what that represents. And then the circle of life relationships, this one came to me, and it was not my typical thing to draw or process. But the chapter is about how, we're born into our little initial family, then we grow and we touch other communities, and we grow and we touch other communities, and there's a whole interaction, and we have the choice to respond to our relationships, create new relationships, improve relationships. So that's what that chapter is about. Oops. And then co-creation, contracts are made. I don't know why snakes came out. They just did. Well, yes I do. Yes I do. The snakes, they shed their skin, and they just totally change their outsides as they're becoming the next version of the snake they're going to be. And I have a cool story about that. It's in the book, but I don't want to go too much longer. So contracts are made. We meet people, and my husband's a great example. We met very young. Boom, contract was made. I think on a soul level, we got married. I was 19, he was 20. What's the big deal? I said to my mom. 19, I'm gonna be 19 when I get married. And 40 years later, we've evolved a lot, and shed our skins and became new people. And I think it was you or Ian said, "Mom, those snakes are all smiling." Only you, and there was 8 snakes, and they're smiling. What's the point if we can't eventually smile after we get through shedding our skin? Chapter 7, Grace and Ease, the art of allowing. When I painted it, it's a mandala in the clouds. We just let that divine essence that created us carry us and move us along. It's my favorite one. And chapter 8, ever changing, always changing. Everything changes. It's kind of the season. Not kind of the seasons. That's what it's meant to represent. We're born, we die. We're born, we die. We're born, we die. Consciously, physically, and we never know what's around the corner. So that, and then the next thing that I love doing, that I started doing it when I go to retreats around the country quite often, and the idea came, well, why don't I draw a mandala for the community area? And then it started at 2 feet, and they're like 5 or 6 feet. And so it's just I draw custom mandalas for the event, and over the course of a few days, everyone sits around and colors and talks. It's just a really great way to, for people to commune, to be together. It's just really fun. I love it. That's a finished one. That's a 6-foot round mandala. It's cool. So I love what I do. Oh. Eric and I collaborated on one project. A friend of mine said, "Can you do a mandala backsplash for my new kitchen?" And I said, "Well, yes, I can." Because I knew I had a professional ceramic artist. Yeah, he drove me crazy because when you're doing something that's permanent on a wall and you're doing what Eric does with the clay, it has to be pretty exact. And I'm not an exact drawer and or painter, so I had to go back and forth. Finally, I had to do it on the computer, so it was all exact. It turned out beautiful. She She says every day she wakes up and thinks her this up. So sorry, I should have had a picture. That's it for me.
Any questions
Oh,
before?
thank you. Yes, any questions?
What kind of paint did you use?
These are all acrylics. And there's lots of crystals. There are lots of crystals.
And glitter. That is on paper and marker and, you know, other people are coloring.
Kathy, you had a technological, you're a techie from a company. What was the influence there, do you think?
I think it's how my brain works. I had never touched a computer or thought about it, and I was in the School of Fine Arts in Madison. I was learning how to draw fonts, University of Madison, Wisconsin, and someone said to you, "Would you look at this desktop publishing thing?" I said, "Okay." I had no idea what they were talking about, so I sat down, saw what you could do with fonts, hit delete. Do another one, make it bigger, make it smaller, and I thought, well, this is the future. We took my student loan. I quit school and bought a huge Mac system, and Eric was 2.
Oh, that's where I get it.
Yeah.
It's risky.
Yes, it was risky. Oh my gosh. And I've had a company. I started a little company, and that grew. And then my husband and I had a company downtown for 14 years. We had huge websites for people like Mount Carmel. And so I have a very active both sides of my brain. Yes, sir.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, the colors are so vivid. I mean, it's really fantastic. And you say it takes only 4 hours in order to do just one?
No, that's the drawings.
Oh.
The drawings take about 4 hours. The paintings, I mean, you can go on, but they take 2 days, minimum.
Still fantastic.
Thank you. And a lot of them took 4 full days to do. But thank you.
The glitter makes them pretty vibrant too.
And Swarovski crystals, how was that?
I also
Yes.
wanted to compliment your color palette. I've told Eric and other classmates down there that I thought I was the most colorful one, but you're right there with me. Very nice. I like it.
Thank you. Thank you. I've often wondered about that, but I just let it go. I mean, I have fun. Yes.
Kathy, and if any of you don't notice, these are sold down in the gift shop too. And
Thank you, Mandala.
and
There's some prints in the gift shop.
and
Oh,
is
and
your
books.
class full tomorrow?
Oh no,
Why don't you tell them about
Saturday I'm having a Mandala Doodles class down at Eric Rausch's studio. This guy. And there still is room for, I could fit 6 more people in. So
Flyers out there.
there are flyers up there. You can it's $45. That's all the supplies, and you get one of my world famous books.
Sign.
Sure. Yes, and I'm doing a painting class the following weekend, but no one has signed up yet because it's 2 days. It's hard to get people to commit to 2 days. But. So, thank you. Nice to see you.
Any other marketing hints or?
I know. Being a marketing person, I always forget. Oh yeah.
Aren't you having a book reading in a few months, too? In German Village or something?
German Village, yes, they sell my books, the book Loft. I don't have it scheduled yet, but thank you. He told me, I was there in October. He said after Christmas, thank you, Elaine, contact me and we'll do a book signing and a book reading. So you can sign up on the email list if you're interested.
Kathy, I know you made reference to it, but how did you encourage Eric to develop that art within him, which is just marvelous. We're so gifted by it here,
She never discouraged it.
and that's the way to say it.
He's a football, he loves football, he loves soccer, he played ice hockey till senior in high school, and said, And then he said, I love ceramic when he was signing up for his first year at school. And we were like, oh. So we didn't know. I mean, we encouraged, he loved it in high school, and he went to some competitions, he won a lot of, and so we went to pretty much everything.
What I remember as a young kid and think about is when I was 9, 10 years old, I would make necklaces out of beads and make them with the neighbor kids, and you still have some.
Bunch of them.
And I had a bike with a basket in the front, and I usually had a spool of wire, and I would, wherever I was, I would just take out the wire and make little figures out of these. So I always had wire sculptures and
Tape.
and then it was tape sculptures. Yeah, I got
If we
tape
did
for
scotch
Christmas
tape,
because I
it'd
could
be-
just do the tape. And it's funny to see the same things happening with my kids now. Real quick about that, like a side tangent before I get into what I'm going to talk about is my son is 2, and of course in our house we have all sorts of ceramics, and there's an area downstairs that's kind of the studio, home studio, but really it's where we put piles of things we might work on. And I have a bunch of ceramics, things like this, and my son will take things and he will start to stack them and really precariously stack them. And we'll come downstairs and it's like, what is Indigo doing down there? And he comes down and it's like something like this, and he looks and he goes, ah! And it makes me so happy to see him doing that, because I actually, in college, I was struggling with why am I making artwork, because that's what they make you do when you get a fine arts degree at some schools, is what you want to make doesn't matter, it's why are you making that, and then that sets you down this idea of concept, and I struggle with that a lot. But one thing that I always knew I enjoyed was precariously balancing things. So sometimes I would make pieces just because I'm fascinated by balance. So it's pretty
Where's
neat
your
to see that in my
permanent
son.
huge stack of bricks?
It's semi-permanent. I don't know if it's still there, but that's at Haystack, no, not Haystack, Watershed Center for Ceramic Arts. I went right after I graduated. I did a residency there, and I made a bunch of bowls like these. This is an example of the work that I was doing in school. I did this piece after school using the same kind of mold, which is pressing clay into a mold and relying on that to make the form. And I love the archaeological sense of them, or like that they look dug up, or however you want to say it. But then on every piece, even though this looks like it's dug out of the ground, I know as the maker that I can control these cracks just slightly by putting different sizes of pieces of clay in there. As I'm grabbing the clay, I can control by putting a bunch of small ones and some medium ones and large ones, or all large pieces, and that will somewhat control this cracking. And I think that kind of is an overarching idea behind all of this work that I have in the show, is this idea of controlling the uncontrollable chaos in the world. And I talked about in my artist statement in school, you know, humans will make square sidewalks, and then immediately nature starts to grow things over top of them, and that's when it's really beautiful, is when you have that kind of perfect square, then something happening to it, or the corners getting broken, and it's in those details where you know the magic happens, or whatever. But there's something actually great, I think, about seeing it from far away and going closer and closer and closer. So I often see all of this work as like a humble attempt to recreate what is happening under our feet, how rocks are created through pressure and heat. Only I have clay body and kiln and process. Part of being a ceramic artist, and one of the reasons why I've just completely embraced that idea since it was really in college when I decided to get a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Ceramics, is the amount of control throughout the entire process. And in school I was a little more of a hothead than I am now, and I would go, painters don't make their own paint. Painters barely even stretch their own canvases, let alone weave their own canvas. And that would be the equivalent of what we were doing in the ceramic studio. We got pounds of
Do you
material.
wish to say anything at this point?
You know, we could
Your son has arrived.
try materials.
I did stretch my own canvases in college.
So did I. And I look at those who bought them from Blick, and I'm like, you don't even know how to stretch a canvas.
They're perfectly square.
Mine weren't. No, they weren't perfectly square. That's
No,
why you buy
these
them from
are.
the store.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the
well,
thing. Yeah, that's why you buy them, because they're cheaper, easier, and better than the ones you make handmade. You have to make a few before you get good at it. But with clay, you know, and as I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the different clay bodies. This is a brick clay, actually straight from a brick factory. One of them is stamped. It says Belden in the side. I've done a lot of work with Belden clay because of a connection through OSU. This is a brick clay, but it's their stoneware brick clay, so it fires to a slightly different color. This one is probably a mid-ranged stoneware. This is another stoneware. I don't know that I have any porcelain up here, but out there there's some porcelain. And just within those variations, you know, there's an endless amount of clay bodies that you can make, because what we do is we take materials that are mined from the ground and we put them together like a baker bakes a cake. So a slightly different recipe will give you a different plasticity to your clay. If it's stretchy, if you have short clay, it'll break. When you roll coils with it, it'll change the color, changes the feel depending on the particle size. A lot of people are familiar with grog, which are like kind of like little sandy rocks. It's already fired clay that's broken down. And a lot of times you think about that when you think particle size, something you can feel. But in this case, when we're talking about porcelain versus stoneware, it's even smaller. You can't see the difference in the particle size, but when you're working with them, you can feel them because the clay is more buttery, or it's more, it holds itself upright. With bigger particles, it's less likely to crack. And there's all these things that are happening with the clay. So there's all that variation. And then within the one clay body, here, this brick clay, this is like sort of what it's supposed to look like. It's bricks. When this comes out of the ground, it's 100% shale, straight from the great state of Ohio, milled up into a powder and then made into a slurry and then eventually a workable clay. And it's actually green when it comes out of the ground. We also call it green clay, but it's literally green. And then it gets fired in the kiln, and the iron from the ground changes to this kind of nice pinkish orange color when it's lower fired, and then right at the right temperature it's the red orange that you get. But even when you look at walls now, you'll notice the different colors in bricks, and you can now know that those are in a slightly different part of the stack in the kiln. The area in the middle of the stack of bricks, slightly different temperature than the outside, and this affects the color range that you get. Yeah.
What type of stone is in the kiln? That light stone, is that a stone?
It's a refractory brick. Yeah, it's a commercially made brick, and they will make.
Is that made out of clay, or?
It's all made out of the same stuff, clay and glass. It's all the same chemistry. It's just a different recipe put together.
It's
for
so light.
Bricks. And then they make it light by mixing up the clay with sawdust, and then when you fire the clay, so you know it's all soft until you fire it in the kiln. When you fire it, it changes chemically and hardens.
Yeah.
So in the case of those soft bricks, they have the sawdust mixed all throughout, and then when it fires, all the sawdust burns away, so you have all these pores throughout the piece. You have a solid brick.
How
that's much
hard
lighter.
can you make the clay? Can you make it as hard as steel?
To sound a little like I'm brushing it off, but not at all. It's unlimited what you can do with like the hardness until you get so hot that the clay melts. You know, you can vitrify clay until it's as hard as.
You know, you got steel, and they make blocks for engines and stuff. Why can't they make the blocks out of clay?
Probably because of the weight, but there is clay in your car. That's one thing that fascinates me about ceramics, is that it's a building block of humanity, of society. There's clay components in our phones to help, where every microchip has ceramic parts for it.
Try on every.
Just the space, it stores our food, so it.
On every telephone pole, there's clay.
Yep. Yeah, so it's a really versatile material. We've used it for millennia to help us survive, and you're actually getting into an interesting way of thinking that this work brings me down. And I sometimes describe myself as a scientist who's, I want to say, too lazy to write things down. I'm fascinated by these science. I'm fascinated by the hardness. I'm fascinated by the melting away and the burning out of things. But I get fascinated by it, and I try to make something attractive, and then I move on from it. Whereas a scientist marks those things down and betters humanity and writes it down so that we can all look forward to it. That's the building right next door to the art building at Ohio State, is the Orton Ceramic Engineering Building, and that's where they all are.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, at what temperature does clay start to melt?
Well, it depends on what type of clay you're talking about. So in ceramic arts, there's low fire temperature, that's about 1600 degrees Fahrenheit, and there are glazes that will melt at that temperature. There are clay bodies that'll work there. Then mid-range, where like a piece like this, mid-range is a lot of what we're doing in the ceramic studio downstairs. That's about 2100 degrees. And then high fire, which some of those pieces went out to out there, about 2200, maybe sometimes closer to 2300 degrees. And then commercial clay will go even hotter than that. But once you get to 3000 degrees, you're pretty much melting all of this stuff into a puddle. And you can see sort of examples of that. Now I'll actually pass this one around so you can see the little bubbles that are in it. And just to kind of get back and finish up what I was saying about clay bodies, how they can change. You know, this is what drives me to make this work out here, is that this is the brown clay that we use in the studio. This is after it's air dried, so it's a slightly different color when you work with it. It's darker brown, and then it air dries to this color, and then we bisque fire it to about 1600 degrees, and it comes out this color. And this is referred to as bisque ware. The clay is still porous at this point, so that we can dunk it into some glaze, and the glaze will soak up into the pores and stick to the outside of this. And then this one is an example. On the bottom you can see this is glaze, so that's not what I'm looking at, but the bottom here where the clay is exposed, you can see how the clay changes in color through the steps, and then that one that's passing around, this is mid-range, that one that's getting passed around is high fire. So at that point the iron is starting to melt and it's blistering. And if it stayed in the kiln for much longer and got too much hotter, that would just go down into a puddle. So I get fascinated by that because that's right on the edge. It's doing what you don't want it to do, but it's capturing that thing that you can't control in the kiln, and if you shut it off at the right time and it solidifies, you get to capture that fluidity, that untouchable thing. And that's what fascinates me about it. And I can't ever tell, every time it comes out I can find, first of all, I don't like it. And then I start to look at it, I'm like, okay, I like that part. And there's two of them out there that when they came out of the final firing, when I was like, yes, I like it. But that pretty rarely happens. It's usually a portion of it. But then I have to decide, because those pieces out there I'll refire, and every time I refire I have the potential to accidentally change things I don't want to change. And there's only so much control that you can have over this, and there's only so much control that I'm trying to get over this. I'm not a scientist, I'm embracing that. And maybe it helps me work through, maybe the actual concept is not about clay and technology, but it's helping me work through the unknowns of my life. You know, letting go of those things in ceramics makes me maybe be able to let go of them when I'm raising my kids and I don't know what I'm doing.
Sounds like the spirit of the mandala.
I was going to say, can I make a comment?
Yes, please make a comment.
It's really interesting to hear you talk. Like, I've heard him talk about clay like this many times, and it's just like crazy how much he loves clay, and how much he thinks about it, and looks at a piece, and it's the same with the mandalas that I create. Like, I really thought, I have no business doing this, I'm not spiritual enough, but I can't stop.
Well, and you just need to keep doing what you do.
Yeah, and then I look at him like, ew, oh, crap, that looks, and then I walk away and I come back and I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty cool. And almost every mandala that I teach where they draw, they start and they're like, oh, it's not as good as anyone else. And then they look back and they're like, what did I just do? So
yeah,
kind of what I hear you doing as well.
Yeah, and that's the same thing. I tell that to, within the first couple hours of the first class that you take with me in the ceramic studio, I usually describe that there's this process where you start with all of this ambition and you know what you're going to make, and you get your block of clay and you start going, and then like the time scale doesn't matter, but it's usually about 2/3 of the way through the project where you look at it and like almost looks like you're going in the right direction, but you're kind of embarrassed by it, especially as a beginner. You think like your students say, it's not as good as anybody else's. And that's the moment where a lot of people, the safe thing to do is just put it away and don't think about it and just forget about it. The difficult thing to do is to look at that ugly mess, take ownership of it, and then push forward. And inevitably, skill level has nothing to do with it. Inevitably, the piece will turn out nicer. And even if it's not quote unquote nicer to the general public as you might perceive it, you're going to be more proud of it because you push through that moment of ugly artwork in front of you.
You got that big piece out there now. It reminds me of your hemispherical pieces out there.
Yeah.
I was curious, and that's you probably made them with those. I was wondering what your concept is of them, and if there were influences, if there were specific pottering influences that caused you to make those.
Not potter influences. I will say that in school I started this pressing technique, and I, for my intents and purposes, invented it for myself, but then immediately saw that I was by far the first person to do this, let alone the only person at this moment. So now I will see artists and I'll appreciate that press mold look, but it wasn't what drove me to do it. I think it was just like the desire to create things fairly quickly, to experiment with and create multiples of them. So I got into mold making and press forming.
What's going to happen when I do this?
Yeah, and definitely the concepts of like, okay, what am I making? I'm trying to emulate, you know, these beauties in the world. So you think of concretions, those fascinating round stones that are dug up, you know, so any craters in the ground, or, you know, and macro and micro, looking at the world as a sphere. I still believe the world is round, by the way. This kind of thing, water, mountains, you know, all of that good stuff comes into it. So I do want to go through the process, but before I forget, I lugged these all up here. This is a body of work that I did because I went hiking in Boone, North Carolina, and this is like a very specific inspiration that led to these pieces. My friend, he goes, oh, you'll love this river. So we went to this river, and these huge boulders, I don't know what kind of rock they were, and then this nice North Carolina river going through them. And as we were walking, I noticed that the boulders had all these some perfect scoops, these bowls scooped out of them. And then I was like, what is that? And then I noticed that where the water was running, under where the water is, there's these perfect scoops in the rock from the repeated hitting it. And then I noticed that in some places, there's no more rock, it's just a hole through the rock. And then as soon as I saw one, and I was like, what's that? And then I was like, oh, the water's doing that. And then I looked up, and it was like, they're just all over the rock. It's like when you see one ant in the ground, and then you see 100 ants, you know, they like come into view. So I just got totally fascinated by that, and went to these bricks and started experimenting in my artist sort of not scientific way of what if I take a brick, and I remember that these ones that have the more rounded edges, they were retaining a little more moisture when I started the water flow. So I built a fountain within a galvanized steel trash can where I had a shelf on a milk crate so I could put the brick on there and have the water below it with a pump. And I bought these little spray arms that you see. I got them from Lowe's, and I could control the spray of it with these two, and I could turn one on, one off, and work with the pressure. So I was working with the amount of water pressure, the direction, and the moisture consistency of the brick. And when you put one in that's already very dry, the water starts to hit it, and it will erode it in one place, but the fact that the clay is dry, once the water gets in there, it'll break off these little pieces. Whereas if the clay is already retaining a lot of moisture, it won't chip away like that, but you can more control the eroding a little bit. And there's a couple, this is a good example too of, I think all of these are I don't need to look at them anymore, but these two, for some reason, did it. And I just to me, I don't know. But and I guess that's...
fired or no?
They were unfired when I did the water.
And then
fired, yeah. And I have this vision, and I think, I don't know, maybe at some point in the Cultural Arts Center I'll be able to do it where I have a big interactive setup, because I love the idea of this science and art mixture and thinking about a kids museum where you could control the water. I'd love to have at least have this fountain thing going so that people can see it, but also maybe if people were invited to change the direction of it and that interactive art, because the product doesn't matter, and that's the truth with the ones out here too. That it's nice. I was so happy to see them all put out because they've all been in the closet. Just I'll make one, takes months and months, put it away. So to have them out, and I am proud of them. I think they look kind of interesting, but they're not. They're not functional. I don't intend to sell them. I don't expect people to collect them or anything like that. But it's about getting through the process, and these are related to the other work that I'm doing, the functional work. I have one. They're surprisingly difficult to make, as I pull out a 5-gallon bucket with full of dry clay. Artwork in process here. And this one I actually marked on the bucket somewhere, like made little notes to myself. I had mid-range buff in there. Started with mid-range brown at the bottom, and then I put some porcelain in there. And I will put the clay in here. It's from scraps that I'm working on, or recycling clay. And then when I'll let it crack as it's cracked right now, and it's actually in its final drying. But this has been a couple months where I let it crack, and then I fill it with slip so that the slip will go into those cracks, and then that dries and cracks again. So it's you know, purposefully trying to get these fissures, and then I guess kind of hoping that it'll stay together so that I do have something to be like, oh, cool. But
So,
it doesn't matter in the long
Flip
run.
it out. How do you get it out of there?
Yeah, eventually I'll take it out of the bucket, probably a few more months, because it's not dry. It looks totally dry, but on the inside it's not.
So it'll-
Yeah, and so I'll put a piece of foam on top and turn it over on foam.
So
and then I'll
that's how
let it
you
sit
did
for a
the
while.
ones that on the
Yeah.
end that are standing.
Those two
they're
initial
all
ones
glazed.
I did here, and it was like actually a blessing of being at the Cultural Arts Center and being able to think about this a little bit more, have time, not have to make pots for sale right away and go to the craft fairs. I was here teaching clay and thinking about clay, so I'm able to kind of like give these time to set up. So this same idea of putting clay in there is what I do for these, and the ones out there that have a crater. Some of them were done this way, where I take and I made all these plaster forms. This is those bouncy balls that you get in any store. It's half of that. And I made these originally, I was making spheres. So a few years I made some brick spheres and clay spheres, and those were fine. But right now I'm more fascinated with the crater thing. I like how they sit on the table. So some of them I've done solid like this, and then after they were set up enough, this being plaster, I can control the drying a little more than this being plastic. So I can get this out of here when it's still a little bit workable. And a couple of them I put on the wheel, and I let the wheel spin, and I cut into them. And one of them I carved a bowl out of the top. The other one I cored all the way down to the bottom and removed that. And then one or two of them I did where I put this negative space bowl in there and then put the pieces in there. One of the white one out there and the one that's under the handle jar. Those are the two. They were actually both done
Under
this
the
way,
glass?
under the glass bell jar. And those are the two that I really like for what it's worth.
Where are the brick balls you made? Remember for a while you
People
could
bought
always
them. They're all at someone's house.
see it brick
People, various people.
balls.
And then I just brought this up just as like a kind of a closing thing of this, like trying to take this. This is artwork that really drives me too. This is like when I make something, just like this is kind of what I want to make. And it's not that I don't like throwing pottery and doing that. It all kind of comes together. But this is like the most arty of my artwork. So I thought it appropriate for this show with my mom, and I'll put this out. There's a couple pots out there, and I guess like my constant discussion with the surfaces that I put on my functional stuff is how can I make a subtle, smooth, washable, dishwasher safe surface of a plate that emulates this kind of like chaotic cracking and things, and these are getting pretty close to it, and a big difference between this and like that guy over there, these ones on the table, is that this is thinner coats of glaze, so multiple layers of thin coats of glaze, as opposed to really letting it thicken up or just putting glass in the bottom. This is a bunch of glass. I did a lot of these. I did a set of about 20 of these, and all but like this one and two others broke. Because they're just technically not great. There's probably, if you look on here, there's little cracks. This is solid glass from there to there, and that's just, you know, if you know anything about working with glass, you have to cool it slowly so it doesn't crack, and I just let it go and let it crack. Although it was, like the first test piece worked, and then I put all this effort into a whole kiln mode, and they all cracked. That was a hit.
So how long did these have to have water dripping under them?
So they were all at least 24 hours. I think this one with
That's
the
it?
wet, yeah. This one that was wet, I think lasted 36 hours or so. But it's just, I mean, it's like taking mud and then spraying water on it. It doesn't take long for it to break down. I have thought about
Mom and Dad,
it.
what do you think?
He loves clay.
Tom,
He
your
loves
reflection too with Kathy.
clay.
Well,
everybody in my family is an artist and I'm not, so I'm just in awe of watching them. And you know, I love coming to these kinds of things because I hear really what they're thinking behind this. I usually am just looking at the end product and that's amazing. But I appreciate it more as an ignorant observer of art than somebody who really understands it.
But that you appreciate it gives Eric.
Okay, so I'll tell the quick story of when I went to OU and I decided to become an art major. It was at orientation weekend. They said history majors go this way, math majors go that way, art majors that way. And I was like, oh, art major, I'll do that. So I decided that moment that day to do that. And the story my mom tells is eventually, like a couple hours in, my dad leaves over, why are we only in the art room?
Why are we starting out business and marketing in the art room? That was my biggest contribution, is not to say, packing up, I'm not paying for OU.
Well, that's actually the punchline of my joke, because he goes, you were a business major and you changed to art major, and I go, when was I a business major? I decided fully. And then, longer story shorter, fast forward a year, I come home from school, and I hear my dad proudly talking to somebody about, like, yeah, he recounted something like, I didn't know he was going to be an art major, but now that I see, because I just came home with just loads of pottery, and you could tell that I was taking it seriously. So I saw then what I learned through him, what I apply to when I'm dealing with other people that I need to, like, I just show that I'll follow through with the project, I'll get it done, I'm going to put the work in, and then that allows me to kind of like do this playful kind of career. That follow through is key, you know.
And so many of your students are in here, Eric.
Yes.
Yes.
Eric, I remember when you went to Cuba.
Oh, sorry, there's one question over here. Helen, I have one question that
I remember when you went to Cuba, I just thought that was so cute that you liked that dog.
Oh, yeah.
Because I thought it was ugly, but God bless you. But did you play with Play-Doh when you were little?
Of course, yes. I didn't eat it though, at least.
Okay, good.
And so do my kids. Yes, my kids are artists. No, I'm not sure I want them to be artists, but I won't discourage it.
You want them to be themselves,
I want them to be.
as you have been encouraged. Any of your students here have anything to say about Eric? Ah.
Not only
Nice and loud there.
not only being a student of Eric's for as long as he's been at the Cultural Arts Center, but also working with him on projects as his studio assistant.
Yeah.
And watching his process, I can see exactly where you guys are coming from with this sense of consciousness, not only being part of the process right in your hand, but also the whole finished work. It's not just one little piece in the puzzle, it's everything. And that comes into mind when we're doing a 1,200 piece tile. Was it or a 600?
And I love working with Brooke, because he said to me one time, he complimented me by saying, I love how much detail you put into the smallest, seemingly insignificant part of this. And that's true, because he just worked through me and it was like, you know, we should really just get this done. I'm like, let's just make sure that this, because it's all those little pieces going to the big. And just like any human being, when I look at the big project, they go, I can't do that. So it's almost a defense mechanism. Let me do this well, and then I'll do that. And then hopefully that will line up with that. And it is. And I'm building this model into a studio business outside if you're really taking things to the next level. And that's why I blurted out, I didn't know you took a student loan and bought a Mac computer with that. But that's where, you know, putting it on the line.
And our son's a yogi, he's taking
I'm a yogi too. I've been practicing for 5 years.
Yeah, you don't
You can tell I'm getting through my anger.
There's no competition between the two of them at all.
Well, this has been wonderful, and I was thinking, this is Mandala. That are all connected is the name of this one. Isn't it exquisite? And son and mother and father, you are all connected, and we benefit from and are gifted by you. Thank you. Thank you.